Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. Being a lifelong Marvel fan, I'm usually inclined to give any new movie, show, or comic a chance. But in some cases, I just don't bother. Either because I don't care for the premise, or I'm just not a fan of certain characters. And until recently, that's how I felt about Ironheart and Riri Williams. Now don't get the wrong idea. I was not among those who hated Riri because she was too woke or diverse or any other of that reactionary crap. I'll even go on record as saying the people who bashed Riri for such petty reasons are assholes, plain and simple, and they should not be taken seriously. That being said, I did follow the emergence and development of Riri Williams in the comics, and for the most part, I just didn't think she was compelling. She came off as a fill-in for Tony Stark, who was in a coma for an extended period after Civil War II. And in terms of personality, she really didn't offer much, aside from a tough attitude and forgettable quips. But when Riri showed up in Wakanda Forever, she was a lot more balanced. She didn't steal the show or anything, but she did make a meaningful contribution to that movie, and Dominique Thorne really shined in how she embraced that role. But despite that performance, I wasn't overly excited when an Ironheart show was announced, and I didn't plan to watch it when it debuted. But then, it got some good word of mouth, and based on some of the details I'd read, it seemed intriguing enough. So I binged the first 3 episodes. And I gotta say, Ironheart really surprised me. Not just with how good it was as a show, but with how it made Riri Williams a genuinely compelling character. And I genuinely believe that should be celebrated in every regard. Because what this show ultimately achieved is something remarkable. Typically, when a show or movie strays too far from the source material, it rarely works out. But for Ironheart, it needed to reinvent certain aspects of Riri Williams. And to that end, this show succeeded on multiple fronts. Even if you didn't see Wakanda Forever, the first 15 minutes of the first episode firmly establishes who Riri is and what motivates her. She's a very smart, very capable young woman, having created her own Iron Man suit. But she also exercises terrible judgment, tends to only ever think in the short term, and always has something to prove, albeit for reasons she avoids articulating. Plenty of that can be chalked up to youthful arrogance, but there's also the sense that Riri knows how intelligent she is. She knows that allows her to achieve more than most. And while at MIT, she selfishly exploits that by making money for doing her classmates' assignments. When she eventually gets caught, she doesn't think she'll be expelled. Because how could MIT expel a student capable of creating her own Iron Man suit? Well, despite all the leeway they'd given her, MIT gives Riri an overdue reality check. Doesn't matter how smart she is. She just broke too many rules, and she's officially expelled by MIT, forcing her to move back to Chicago. But even then, the impact really doesn't sink in for her. Riri doesn't seem overly upset about being expelled. She's more concerned with no longer having access to the resources she had at MIT. Without those resources, she can't continue refining her Iron Man suit, and she can't complete her work on the necessary AI interface. On top of that, it's clear that Riri is actively avoiding other personal issues. Even before the events of Wakanda Forever, Riri's best friend, Natalie Washington, as well as her stepfather, were killed in a drive-by shooting. This definitely affects her in ways that she hasn't fully processed. That shows in how distant and dismissive she is of her mother and friends. But it shows much more prominently in how she reacts to her prototype AI taking Natalie's form. It's jarring, it's triggering, and Riri's first instinct is to dismiss it as a glitch. But the more she interacts with Natalie, despite knowing she's a purely digital construct, the more emotionally attached she becomes. She tries throughout the show to avoid that, but she just can't. And rather than confront these feelings, she sinks her time, energy, and passion into her other inventions. That's actually a critical detail from the comics that this show captures well. Losing Natalie and her stepfather is an important catalyst in Riri's story. Even Natalie becoming her AI is something that's ripped straight from the comics. But this show builds a different story around those details. It also helps put Riri on her own hero's journey, taking her from an arrogant super genius to the kind of hero who's easy to root for. That journey even has some major parallels with Tony Stark, including the appearance of Zeke Stane, son of Obadiah Stane from Iron Man. But unlike Tony, Riri takes a different path towards realizing the cost of her arrogance. Now that's very necessary given her circumstances. She wasn't born rich, she didn't inherit all the resources of a major company, so she has to make everything herself. And after getting expelled from MIT, her options are limited. And that's where Parker Robbins, aka the Hood, and his criminal crew enter the picture. They effectively recruit Riri into joining them as their new tech person, promising her all the money and resources she could ever need for her work. In terms of making Ironheart stand out for all the right reasons, Parker and his crew end up being another pleasant surprise. Now, this show took a significant risk, making the Hood the primary villain, because he is not typically associated with Riri Williams. In fact, he's never been closely tied to any one particular hero, having clashed with Ghost Rider, Daredevil, Spider-Man, and the Avengers. His powers being tied to magic instead of tech also make him an odd choice for a major antagonist. But ultimately, he proves to be the perfect villain for Riri to face. Because in many respects, Parker represents the path Riri was on after getting expelled. Not being rich or well-connected like Tony Stark means she won't be given anything. She has to take it. And Parker Robbins embraces that ethos to the utmost. He tries to impart it on Riri, tempting her to be just like him. When she helps him succeed with their first job, there's this sense that Riri is quite tempted. It probably helps that the jobs they pull specifically target billionaires who already have so much, yet aren't being heroes in the mold of Tony Stark. That really does resonate with Riri. It also acts as a convenient excuse to justify her actions. But eventually, the darker aspects of Parker's character start to show. The magic hood that gives him his powers proves to have a very dark influence. And unlike other challenges Riri has confronted, she can't solve it with her usual tech genius. She is very much out of her element here. And after a job goes wrong that results in the death of John, one of Parker's friends, she is officially in over her head. More than anything else, that's what brings out the best in Riri Williams. That's what elevates Ironheart into being a truly great show. It's also something that the early comics with her clearly lacked. When every enemy or challenge is pure logistics, Riri has the advantage. She's a genius, and she often hides behind her genius to avoid uncomfortable situations. She did that so often in the comics that she really didn't undergo much growth. But this show puts her up against forces that no amount of genius or tech can overcome. She has to learn from others about magic and how to fight it. She also has to lean on friends and loved ones for help. But Riri is so used to doing everything herself, and she actively fights to keep it that way until she can't. She avoids this for multiple episodes, but in the end, she accepts that just being smart and capable isn't enough. She even admits why she ultimately does what she does. It's not just because she can, it's so others don't suffer the losses that she suffered. And that's not just heroic. That shows a level of personal growth well beyond her age. And it makes her eventual triumph over the Hood that much more satisfying. However, that triumph does come at a cost. And that's where Mafisto enters the picture. Now, I know I'm getting into heavy spoiler territory here, but this detail is definitely worth spoiling. Because Mafisto has been teased before in the MCU. I still remember how fans speculated on his influence in other shows such as WandaVision. But with Ironheart, there's no need for speculation. Even though he only shows up for one episode, Mafisto really makes his presence felt. And Sacha Baron Cohen absolutely nails the role perfectly. I'll go so far as to say that this may end up being one of Marvel Studios' best casting choices in years. Because what he does isn't just critical to how the story in Ironheart plays out. It demonstrates just how impactful Mafisto can be in future Marvel stories. Mafisto is capable of delivering the impossible for anyone in a desperate situation. But what he offers always comes at a high cost. That cost isn't always immediately clear, but it tends to have a dramatic effect. For both Riri and Parker, Mafisto's influence guarantees which path they ultimately follow. It also lays the foundation for how they'll affect other areas of the MCU moving forward. Mafisto also gives Ironheart this distinct sense that Riri's hero's journey isn't complete, but she has taken the necessary steps. She makes bad decisions for the right reasons, whereas Parker and Zeke make bad decisions for selfish reasons. On both fronts, there are consequences to those choices. And Ironheart as a show doesn't hide from the larger complexities. It makes for a better story, better characters, and a better overall insight into what makes Riri's superhero journey so compelling. In the end, it doesn't matter what your attitudes towards Riri were before the show. Even if you hated how she was portrayed in the comics, I highly recommend giving this show a chance. After watching Ironheart from start to finish, I won't say that I'm a diehard Riri Williams fan, but I will proudly say I'm officially on her side and actively rooting for her future in the MCU. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, take care and stay safe.